Welcome to Cinemophile, where we bring you the best in independent, documentary, and foreign films, and we talk to the people who made them. I'm your host, Mike Caspar, and you can find out more about the program by going to cinemophilepod.com. On this edition of Cinemophile, we're going to be talking with the producer of a remastered documentary film that was originally released in 1989. The film that was called, and still is, The Long Way Home. This version is called The Long Way Home, Remastered and Expanded, and it was originally directed by film legend Michael Apted, and it focused on a time when the Soviet Union was opening up a little bit. They called it Glasnost, and one of the impacts of that was an exchange of musicians. They were coming to the U.S. to work and to essentially mingle with other musicians, and in particular Boris Grebenshchikov, who was one of the first to come over to the West from his own band, and recorded an album with many American artists, including Dave Stewart, Lennox, Chrissie Hynde, and others. It's a really wonderful kind of time capsule and look into the past, and just very, very well done. Without further ado, let me bring onto the program the producer of The Long Way Home, Remastered and Expanded, Steve Lawrence. Steve, welcome to Cinemophile.
Thank you, Mike. Good to be here.
Mentioning to you before we got started that I remember this. I don't remember all the specifics of it, but I remember this kind of opening of music to artists of, at that time, the Soviet Union. And it was interesting and provocative, but I don't have a great recollection. I just remember it happening. How did you come to this project?
It began for me in 1986 when I started to learn about underground Soviet music. There was a woman named Joanna Stingray, an American, who had been going to Leningrad and Moscow and getting to know some of the artists. And she released an album in the US that was a compilation of some of these Soviet bands. One of them was Aquarium, Boris Grebenshchikov's band. At that time, I was working as the senior producer, director of long-form programs at MTV. And I was making a lot of rock documentaries about current artists in the US and UK, who were topping the charts. That was the nature of MTV. And I was getting a little frustrated and bored with it because these weren't necessarily, to me, the most exciting artists. So when I learned about the Soviet underground rockers who were unable to make a living from their music, they were running from the KGB, they had to distribute their work through cassettes, basically underground. I was fascinated. I wanted to know more about the bands, and eventually I convinced MTV to let me make a documentary about the Soviet underground scene. It was called Tell Tchaikovsky the News. And that's where I met Boris, first started to work with him. And when I found out that he was getting a record deal in 1988 to record an album for CBS Records, that was like catnip to me as a filmmaker. And I said, I want to make a documentary about what happens to Boris when he leaves the Soviet Union for the first time and enters the Western rock and roll world. And eventually, through a series of events, Michael Apted getting involved, we were able to make the film The Long Way Home.
Yeah, that is a fascinating part. Thank you for bringing the conversation around to Michael Apted. For those of you who know the name, and it's been a little while since he died fairly recently, and
2021.
Yeah, and but he was responsible for some amazing work. If you're a documentary film person, you'll know about the Up series that he did, which was amazing, following these people for decades into their lives. Um, Also, we know him from Coal Miner's Daughter, which received 7 Academy Award nominations, and so much more. He really was a terrific filmmaker, and he was in the documentary genre, very much a part of that. So, what was that like working with Michael in terms of just sort of coordinating and just what you gleaned from working with Michael Apted?
It was a fantastic experience, and he became a friend and a mentor. Michael, of course, he was very busy making feature films, but he loved documentaries, as you said, the Up films, and he had just made a film about Sting called Bring On the Night. Sting had just launched his solo career, and he had asked Michael to make the film about that. And Michael loved music, and he loved making documentaries, and the documentaries fed his feature films. I think of all the filmmakers I've worked with over a long career, he was the one who had the most enthusiasm for the filmmaking process. I'll just give you a little story. We arrived in Leningrad. This was summer 1988 after a very long and winding road. Something like 18 hours of travel, flying into Moscow, long train ride to get to Leningrad, crew completely exhausted, but we had to go and shoot that morning with Boris in his apartment. So the crew is, oh my God, or how are we going to get through this day? But we get on the bus, we go to Boris's flat, and Michael grabs one of the lighting kits, which is actually quite heavy, and he starts running up 6 flights of stairs ahead of everyone else, saying, "Come on, girls, let's go." So, I mean, that was Michael. He just, every day for him making a film was a glorious day. I had so much pleasure working as his producer, and I got to be the second unit director as well for that film. So, a fantastic experience.
Well, just as an observer of his work, one of the things that I take away is the fact that this Up series was following these people demonstrated to me a real affinity for the arc of a person who may not be famous, who just sort of people getting to know them and watching their lives unfold. It's a testament to the kind of sensibility that I think you're describing.
Yes, Michael loved people. He loved humanity. He was endlessly curious. So he was the right person, especially with his love of music, to make this film about Boris.
Well, let's switch over to the Long Way Home remastered and expanded, the version that's coming out, and getting to know a little bit more about Boris Grebenshchikov. And where did he fit in terms of the music scene, what was happening at that period of time in the Soviet Union?
Boris was one of the leaders of the underground movement. He had formed a band in 1972 called Aquarium. He was very, very important to the development of Soviet rock. He was an innovator. He brought in a wide array of musical influences, reggae, Irish music. He was encyclopedic about rock. And he also brought in a poetic influence
Right.
that was transformative to Russian rock and roll. You can compare what he did to Russian rock to what Bob Dylan did, bringing that poetic sensibility, but also a true musician's appreciation for the music, connecting words and music. So Boris was he was one of the leaders in terms of the opportunity that he had to record an album for CBS Records. He was the natural choice because he was fluent in English, which most of the other Russian artists weren't. And he was also drop dead handsome. He had an extraordinary attitude towards the whole adventure, this whole odyssey of coming to the West. I remember talking to him one day during his first trip, and he said, "I'm the first person who's been sent on a mission by the Soviet Union where the mission is to have the most fun I possibly can have." And that was his attitude. I mean, he approached it with such grace and humor
Yeah.
and excitement at the same time, of course.
Well, over the course of the film, we see Boris Grebenshchikov as in his creative mode in studio. And we also get to watch, kind of peeling back the curtain on Dave Stewart, Annie Lennox, Chrissie Hynde, Ray Cooper. I always love Ray Cooper. Whenever I see him in anything, he brings a certain like joy to what he does. He's always struck me as a guy who'd be fun to work with as far as his musical sensibilities. But we get to see all of this unfolding as they're recording this album. And there are a few Spinal Tap moments in this little enterprise, which I truly appreciated. And there's just a lot here. And just watching Boris as he begins to kind of get his footing, how he's going to create this, working with his bandmates. And then at one point, and correct me if I'm wrong, if I just am reading too much into this, there is a moment where he gets a little drunk on what is happening around him, and a few moments where it feels like he's turning a little diva-ish in the film. Am I overstating that, or is that just part of the creative process? Is that?
Yeah, I think you may be overstating it. I think you're talking about a section of the film that takes place in LA, where
That's
Boris has gone to try to finish the album and mix
yes.
it with Dave Stewart at Dave's studio. And he's under enormous pressure.
Yeah.
And he's pushing back against that pressure. I mean, you can call it diva-ish, but he's trying to protect his artistic
Okay.
integrity
All
under
right.
great pressure from his American managers, the record label, Dave and Dave's engineer, Manu. You know, they're all saying, "We've got to finish this. What do you want? What is it that you want?" Boris had never made an album under these conditions. In the Soviet Union, they didn't have studios, really. You know, the technology was new to him, having a producer was new to him. He wrote some superb songs for the album, but he was trying to figure out, how do I take me, Boris Grebenshchikov, as an artist, and translate it not only into English, because most of the songs were in English,
Yeah.
but working with Dave Stewart, whose sensibility was a little bit different from where Boris was coming from. And so that moment is the crucible for
Yes.
Boris. And curious to see how audiences react to
Yeah.
it.
And again, I'm projecting because I think I've seen too many of these kind of documentaries, or I'm so used to Spinal Tap sensibility, watching rock people create in this pressure cooker
Right,
that you're describing. It's easy to
right.
feel that way. Well, it's a lot of fun, and I really want to underscore that this is a journey that he's on. Everyone in the film is, I think, doing their best to make it come to pass, to be the work that they want it to be. And at the end of the day, there's some really good music that they create in the process of
Yes,
doing
yes.
this.
Dave brought his band, Eurythmics, minus Annie Lennox, who couldn't be there because she was in the late stages of pregnancy, brought Eurythmics to Leningrad to perform with Boris and his band. And you see them go through the rehearsal process, these two different groups trying to figure out how to play together. And then they do two amazing concerts for for Boris's hometown fans. That's the climax of the original film. And then we have the epilogue, which
Yes.
brings Boris's journey into the present, which is very important because here we are 36 years later, 37 years later, and he's evolved as an artist, and a lot has changed, not only in his life, but in the life of Russia and how that affects him. And that's an important part of the epilogue.
Well, thank you for pointing that out. Absolutely. This is just not the remastered version. It's expanded, as I said in the beginning. And you're right. And it is really a good film. It's just it's fun to watch, and it's also insightful into the time and to the creative process. And there's a lot more to be gleaned from. And to see Crosby, Stills and Nash in there as well. I failed to mention them. Kind of fun. There's a lot of fun things in the film. Again, the film is called The Long Way Home, Remastered and Expanded. We've been speaking with the producer. I also want to shout out to the editor, Susanne Rostock, for her help and assistance on all of this. So,
Yes.
big part of making this happen as well. So, Stephen, thank you so very much for spending some time with us here on Cinemaphile.
Thank you, Mike. I enjoyed it.
You have been listening to Cinemaphile with Mike Kaspar, the place where you will hear from the best in independent documentary and foreign filmmakers. Please check out our previous interviews as well as upcoming interviews and special programming by going to cinemaphilepod.com. We are also available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube, searchable under Cinemaphile with Mike Kaspar. Until next time, thank you for listening.